Hello everyone, my name is T-Leaf, and welcome to my overview of the 5th Major Tribes Ascend update, aka the Accelerate update. So I'll just go over a few general changes first. The weapon upgrade system has now been overhauled. Basically, you no longer purchase small upgrades for your weapon with experience, like plus 5 ammo, plus 20% armor penetration. Now, you just get those upgrades by using the weapon. And they made it look like, in the official release video that Hi-Rez put out, they made it look like you'd still use the old system as well, where you purchased those smaller upgrades with experience, but now you can only master the weapon with experience, which is just buying all the upgrades for that, and it costs 15,000 XP for each weapon. There's no way of getting the smaller upgrades without just using the gun. So yeah, essentially you can either just pay a bulk amount of XP, get the weapon mastered straight away, or you can level it up slowly just by using it. They also made a few minor balance changes, well, and some major ones actually. Sentinels now have a longer respawn time after they die. So if you die as a Sentinel class, you get 5 extra seconds respawn time, which I can see why they did that, to be honest, because a Sentinel doesn't really, his optimal sniping position is often his spawn point, so there has to be some disadvantage to dying. They also slightly increased the fall-off damage on his sniper rifle, so you have to be a little bit closer to start getting maximum damage, which personally I'm fine with because I prefer to snipe a little bit closer than most Sentinels. They slightly buffed the Gladiator for the Brute, which the buff essentially gives it slightly bigger radius. It's like 6% or something, it's not a huge amount, and also lowered the delay it takes before it explodes, which I haven't really tried it much, but it seems like a decent idea. Automatics have overall been nerfed. They now have lower clip sizes, more fall off, and the upgrade that you could purchase for them that lowered their reload time, that upgrade now is less effective. Which is good, to be honest, because no one likes automatics. Oh, and EMP grenades, now they do a lot less damage, but they do almost double the energy drain. So essentially they're no longer a really highly powerful damaging grenade like they used to be. They were almost on par with a regular frag grenade for damage. They now are pretty much purely a utility item. They can't kill people, basically. This new patch also added 27 new weapons. I'm not going to go through all of them because many of them are quite similar to their originals and many of them are quite similar to each other. But essentially the highlights would be, I'll just list the ones that I think are particularly good and the ones that you should avoid. So for recommendations, I'd say Dueling Spin Fuser for the Pathfinder is quite fun. It's essentially, on a direct hit it does more damage. If you miss, it has a lower splash radius. And that is actually, it has to be a direct hit to get the extra damage. You can't hit near them and get the extra damage. It has to be full-on contact. But yeah, that's more of a skilled weapon, I'd say. There are reasons you take the Light Spin Fuser though, like if you feel less confident in your aim or if you just want extra splash damage. Sentinel gets a new sniper rifle, the BTX-1A. I'd recommend avoiding this for now because when I tried it, it was slightly glitched. Essentially, it's supposed to give you an extra bullet in your clip at the trade-off of having slightly slower charge time. The problem with it is that ammo upgrades don't seem to apply to it at the moment, which means that essentially you can get the same amount of ammo and a faster recharge by using the original rifle once you've upgraded it. But with this one, once you've upgraded it, it's essentially a worse version of the original. So I'd avoid that for now, but it's worth looking into after they've fixed it. I'd also avoid the focused Claymore because, to be honest, it doesn't really play much different from the regular Claymore. It has 100 less damage, but a tiny bit more range. Tiny bit, not a lot. I wouldn't recommend it, to be honest. Infiltrator, I'd pretty much avoid all of the Infiltrator unlocks unless, you only play Infiltrator and you have nothing else to spend your cash on, because they barely affect your playstyle. It's like the Arctic Rhino, slightly more damage, slightly slower fire rate. But you wouldn't notice if someone just swapped your weapons without telling you. you bet you would have a hard time noticing. The Arctic SN7, basically the same deal as the Arctic Rhino, just slightly more damage but less ammo in a clip. Again, you'll hardly notice the difference. Then we have the Sticky XL, which, like many of the bolt item unlocks, just increases the radius of the explosion but lowers the damage, and it's only a slight difference. That might be worth looking into, but I wouldn't. It's not a huge deal. I'd say both of the soldiers' weapon unlocks are worth a look at. The Ghast's rifle, which is an assault rifle that does more damage but has lower clip size. It does actually play quite differently to the regular assault rifle. Still feels the same role, but it just feels different. So if you like using the assault rifle on the soldier, I recommend giving the Ghast's rifle a look, because it is essentially this very similar weapon, but it just feels different. You might prefer the feel of it. I personally do prefer it. But, you know, everyone's different. It depends whether you prefer to shoot shit tons of bullets that don't do much damage, or just fire a few that do more. He also has the Thumper DX, which is slightly confusingly named because the Thumper DX was the original Thumper. But now the original Thumper is called the Thumper D. Yeah, it's confusing. It doesn't really matter though. The Thumper DX does extra direct damage but has a smaller radius. It's essentially the same deal as the dueling spin fuser. You know, if you are more confident in your aim, I'd take the Thumper DX. Soldier also gets a quick fuse grenade, which the Technician gets something very similar actually, but essentially it's just his regular grenade, but it goes off a bit quicker. So obviously, close range, it's going to be a bit better than the regular grenade, but you won't be able to chuck it as far. It won't drastically alter your play style, but you might prefer it. Raider doesn't get too much worth noting. He has a Desert NJ4, which alters the fire rate, so it shoots a bit faster but does less damage. Again, that's just a weapon where you might like the feel a bit more than the original weapon, but it doesn't actually do anything different. The Technician gets another automatic that just feels a little bit different. He gets the Rockwind TCN4, which does actually quite a bit more damage. It does about 50% extra damage, but it fires noticeably slower, like you will. It does feel a lot meatier because it fires like instead of, and it has a little bit less ammo in the clip, but that's hard to notice. Essentially, yeah, another one. Prefer the feel of it, you might not. It also gets the Approved Rage Repair Gun, which I think is probably one of the few unlocks that I would seriously recommend getting. It does actually, I think it's drastically more powerful than the original, because you can actually just heal like a turret or something and just stay quite a bit far away from it and avoid the like huge amount of spam that people will throw at you if they see you repairing something. The trade-off is supposed to be a slightly lower repair rate, but it's not too noticeable, especially after you've upgraded this one. The Juggernaut gets the Fusion Mortar Deluxe, which is a fusion mortar with a faster projectile with less radius, and apparently it does more damage, but it only does a little bit, like 100 extra damage. You won't notice it. Essentially, you'll pick this because it's got longer range, effectively, because of the faster projectile, and it gives people slightly less reaction time, and you have to lead slightly less. But, you know, the trade-off is it has less radius. Personally, I'm not sure whether I'd take it or not. You have to relearn the mortar physics to use it effectively, and I haven't got around to doing that yet. I don't know, it might be a bit weird, because the Merv and the regular mortar fire the projectiles at the same speed, so it's quite easy to switch between them, but I think if you got used to using this, it'd be quite hard to go back to using the other two when the situation called for them. I don't know though, it's worth a look at if you're a dedicated Juggernaut player. Also gets the Spin Fuser MKX on the Juggernaut, which is essentially the Soldier Spin Fuser. So if you prefer that to the MKD, then it might be worth giving a shot. Doombringer gets yet another sort of flavour automatic. He gets a chain gun that fires slower but does more damage, yeah, you know. He also gets one of the more interesting unlocks in this update, the Titan Launcher. It's essentially a saber launcher, but it dumbfires the missile instead of being a lock-on missile. It does 750 damage versus infantry, it does 900 damage against armour, and it has quite a large splash radius. It's a little bit smaller than Mortar, but it is actually quite a big splash radius. The problem with it is, like I said, only 900 damage versus armour is not a lot. You can empty all 10 of your rockets into a tank and it won't kill it. So this is essentially a close-range infantry weapon. Because the rockets air burst. They detonate after, I don't know, maybe 10 meters or so. So it is a close range weapon. You can't fire across the whole map with it. I don't know how useful it would actually be, because I was using it earlier, and like switching to it, firing a missile, and then switching back to the chain gun wastes a lot of chain gun time that you could spend firing. I think it's if you pull it out, I think you should keep it out basically, but it could be quite good for finishing people off, and for maybe indoor fighting, knocking people around a bit. But because it's low damage, I don't think it can really compete with a proper spin fuser. The Brute gets the Devastator spin fuser, which is essentially another direct hit explosive weapon. However, this one works a little bit differently. It does more damage on a direct hit, but less damage on an indirect hit. But it doesn't have a lower radius. In fact, it's actually got a tiny bit bigger radius, but you'd be hard pressed to notice it. It's maybe like 10 centimeters or something. So essentially, if it's a direct hit, it does about 150 more damage than the regular heavy spin fuser. But if you hit them with splash damage, it does about 50 less damage. And I'd honestly recommend this over the regular heavy spin fuser, because the damage increase of a direct hit is actually quite high, whereas the reduction of missing is actually quite low. And it's as it's still got the same radius, it's still quite a good, indoor weapon. It's quite a good weapon for AoE damage. Still a perfectly respectable weapon in regards to AoE. And the final weapon I want to give a mention to is the Extended Fractal Grenade. Essentially gives you an extra second duration over the regular fractal, but does a little bit less damage per hit. It does about 30 less damage per hit. Now I personally think this is superior to the regular fractal grenade, because fractal grenades aren't generally for damage, they're for holding an area. Like, you won't get many kills with your fractal, but you might escape death quite often because of it. You throw it in a hallway, it'll block that hallway for 5 seconds, no one will walk into it. This one lasts 6 seconds, and the damage decrease isn't enough to allow people to just wade through it. If they walk into it, they're still going to die. They might take like an extra hit or so, but they're still dead if they get caught in the middle of that fractal blast. I can't really think of a situation where you'd want the extra damage that the original fractal provides. So I'd definitely recommend looking at the extended fractal if you play Brute. Anyway, that pretty much covers all the interesting weapons. There's quite a lot of grenades that have a wider radius but less damage, and weapons that work in a similar way. But you can kind of figure out for yourselves whether they're worth investing money in. They're not really interesting, they don't have too much to discuss about them. Anyway, I hope this has been informative and educational. I have been T-Leaf. Goodbye.